Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sherry Pittman, Managing Director of the California Clean Energy Fund. We've got a small crowd, and I want to recommend that we make this a little bit more intimate. And if we could get everyone to come into the center and come up front, we're going to take advantage of the fact that we've got the opportunity to get a little bit closer in what is a very important conversation on equity and the energy transition. As I said, I'm with the California Clean Energy Fund, and our work is really about accelerating the energy transition. We do that through supporting entrepreneurs with funds, with accelerator activities, with connections to investors. We catalyze technology solutions, and we work with partners to find financing solutions where there are new creative mechanisms that are needed to make clean energy happen. For us, doing so justly is a central part of our mission. We sit firmly in the belief that we all have a responsibility to make sure that those typically left out of opportunity, those that are most impacted by climate change, have every opportunity to benefit from and participate in the energy transition. And with that as the center point of what we do, I am so delighted to be hosting this panel today. We have Alvaro Sanchez from the Greenlining Institute and Denise Fairchild from Emerald Cities Collaborative here with us. And they're going to share with us why equity matters, the lessons that they've learned, what's working in the field, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can work together to accelerate their great work. I'm actually going to have them self-introduce themselves and their organizations, but before I do that, I would love to get a sense of who we have in the audience. So just by a show of hands, investors, VC, sort of interests, okay? Foundations, other philanthropists, policy folk, yay. Entrepreneurs, great. Thank you. Awesome. Alvaro, let's start with you. Can you give us a sense of Greenlining's work, how you intersect the energy sector, your work in the environment, and really from that perspective of why equity matters for you?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Alvaro Sanchez. I'm the Director of Environmental Equity at the Greenlining Institute. And for us, equity matters because we win when we put equity at the front of what we're doing. Greenlining is an organization that has been working for a couple of decades on addressing redlining, the practice by which communities of color and low-income communities were left out of economic opportunity and really suffered from a great degree of disinvestment. So greenlining, as the word would suggest, is the response to that, being able to use capital as a way to address the systematic challenges that communities have faced and be able to generate economic opportunity for many of the folks who have missed that opportunity. For us, it shouldn't matter what your zip code is or what your neighborhood looks like or what your race is to gain access to economic opportunity. So greenlining seeks to address that. As it relates to this question around clean energy technology, we know that in California, we are proving that you can decouple reductions in emissions from growth in the economy. And we know that we're creating a whole new economic sector. And we see this as a great opportunity to build it with equity at the center of it. One in which communities that are most impacted by climate change, by pollution, and by socioeconomic factors can actually leapfrog into a just transition that allows them to benefit economically as well as environmentally and health-wise as well. So this is a really important question for us.
Great, thank you. And Denise?
Great. Well, good afternoon. Hopefully you had lunch and you're all pretty energized and excited about this topic. I'm Denise Fairchild. I'm the National Director of a nonprofit called Emerald Cities Collaborative. We've been around a little more than about 6 years now. And the purpose of being, it's a coalition of labor, business, community, and government with a really grand vision. And that vision, really, Sherry, is to how do we rebuild the American economy? And at that essence, I mean, it started around 2009 when the economy was in the toilet. And it was a sense that we can do two things. First, we've got to dismantle the extractive economy. We have to dismantle the fossil fuel economy as a first step. And the reason we have to do that is because what it's doing to our environment. So we all know about climate change. We don't have to go into those details. But the equity part of the environment is that it's our communities, low-income communities of color, that are most impacted by carbon emissions and most impacted by greenhouse gas emissions because we live in toxic communities, whether it's around factories or freeways or, other fossil fuel spewing industries. So we've got to look at how the extractive industry is impacting everyone, but particularly communities of color. It's important to dismantle the economy because of the fossil fuel economy, because what it's doing to equity as a social equity issue. The asthma rates and the diabetes rates and the cancer rates in our communities, we contribute least to carbon emission, but we are impacted most. And more importantly, when it comes to the climate change, we're first and last to actually be able to recover from extreme weather conditions. And then finally, the economy. The whole issue of income inequality is really rooted in the monopoly of the utility sector, that where in effect we are seeing that utilities own all of the fossil fuel economies. They make the top 5 oil companies make 5 times more, actually a lot more than the average worker. So social equity, environment, and economy, all of this we see an important work that we have to deal with. But besides dismantling fossil fuel, part of what we also do at Emerald Cities is to rebuild the alternative. What is the way to reimagine, re-engineer, and reinvest and build our economy in a way that is sustainable and just and fully inclusive? And that only happens when we are working in partnership with labor, business, and community. We have to change the institutions that have led to inequalities, that have led to inequity, to get to a new platform.
Great. Thank you both. I want to stay with you for a moment, Denise, and talk a little bit more about dismantling and rebuilding the economy, and specifically the elements that Emerald Cities works with so well to make economic opportunity happen. And I definitely want to hear about some of those challenges as well.
Great. Well, first of all, I'm going to drive you all to Sherry's spot because our roadmap from a low road to a high road economy, we'll have copies of this there, which is exactly the work that we are doing at multiple levels. But at the end of the day, we are working on a couple of things. We work on the demand and the supply side of this sector, of building a new clean energy sector. On the demand side, we're trying to, in all of our markets, and we work in 10 metropolitan regions around the country, we're really trying to figure out what are the policies that we can enact that would fundamentally ensure that not only are we investing in a clean energy and a sustainable economy, but that investment has some handcuffs on them, that those investments are clearly and intentionally focused on economic inclusion. What are the local hire requirements? What are the local procurement requirements? And what are we doing to ensure that not only do low-income communities have access to these investment opportunities, but that we're being transparent and we build accountability systems to make sure that those targets that we set are actually enacted. And we organize community-based organizations to actually not to help contractors. If you understand most of this clean energy work, 60% of it is construction-related work. So how do we make sure that the construction industry is able to meet the higher bar that we're raising, that they're able to find contractors with the competency, the capital, and the wherewithal to be able to do the energy and water retrofit work that we're doing? How do we help these contractors find low-income disadvantaged workers, ex-offenders, and welfare moms, whoever? How do we make sure that they're able to find folks that are prepared to engage in this really hard work. So it's not just to say that we're setting labor and community standards and that we're attaching them into financing resources, but we're also engaging the community as partners to make sure that we're successful in our targets and our goals.
And let's talk a little bit more about that community engagement piece. And I would particularly love to have you share how Emerald Cities brings those pieces together to make sure that those entrepreneurs not only have the skills that you're helping them to garner so they're ready to take on those contracts, but carry it forward to successful, thriving small and medium businesses.
Right. So thank you for all these hard questions. Besides the demand side work, we really do work on the supply side, and we have what we call e-contractor. We do a couple of things. First, we organize coalition of small business organizations, technical assistance organizations, to provide the bonding that's required for folks to play the game, to provide the CDFIs, to provide the working capital that's needed to be effective to take on a $20 million solar project, which is a project we just tried to, put together, and it failed just as a matter of issue. But we also we've got the workforce coalitions, we have the business coalitions, and at the end of the day, we have an e-Contractor Academy. It's a training program that we provide small minority women, veteran-owned contracting firms to figure out how to pre-qualify for these fairly large projects. Many of them are just trades guys, and tradeswomen, and they know plumbing, and they know maybe some electrical stuff, and but at the end of the day, if we're doing big buildings, and so hospitals, universities, schools, to be able to do solar and energy efficiency projects, a whole nother level of work, and it requires understanding how to do the public bidding process. So we really teach them how to do public bidding, how to do estimating, how to understand even our own communities' local hire and workforce standards, and to make sure that they're actually paying prevailing wages and that they're fully engaging disadvantaged workers within their own companies, and how to do the monitoring and compliance and the reporting that we look for in these projects. So training and capacity building is a very important part of increasing the inclusion of the communities that we care about in this growing, $13, $17 trillion industry.
Thank you. Now, Alvaro, in many ways, the two of you together are the perfect complement. You're on the ground doing the hard policy work, making sure that the state of California continues to evolve both in our approach to environmental standards, to the practices and programs, and where the state invests. And then Denise is ready to come in and make the dollars work in community. You've had some particular successes, or I should say we in the state of California have had some particular successes. Would love to hear a little bit, share with the audience what's happened in the last day.
Absolutely. Today is a really good day for environmental equity and justice in California. Just about an hour ago, the governor signed two really important bills, AB 1550 and AB 2722. Both of these bills are going to direct a large portion of California's greenhouse gas reduction fund, which is the cap and trade revenue, to the state's most disadvantaged communities. The state will now devote a minimum of 35% of those revenues, which this year are over $3 billion, towards addressing the needs of disadvantaged communities in California. This is the first state that's made that type of investment in the communities that are most impacted by climate change and pollution at the same time. So we think that this is a fantastic victory for the state, but also, of course, for these disadvantaged communities. 2722 is going to create a program that really invests in neighborhood scale sustainability practices, meaning that if a community has identified for itself that they want to invest in renewable energy, in transit, or green infrastructure, they don't have to go to 6 or 7 different agencies to receive the funds for that. They would have a one-stop shop, one agency, a Strategic Growth Council, to be able to apply for a comprehensive set of investments, all directed at a neighborhood scale in the most impacted communities in California. So we're incredibly happy about this victory. But as it relates, I think, to the questions that we're having here, is that this investment really means kind of seed money for being able to invest in clean energy technology that otherwise would have missed these communities. We know that clean energy technology is usually, can cater towards early adopters. And that's what we saw in California in terms of our electric vehicle market. Early adopters were the first target set of folks who the investments were going towards getting them to go into those vehicles. But now, through our work, what we've done is incentivize the purchase of electric vehicles in disadvantaged communities by being able to use state resources to buy down the price of used and new electric vehicles in the most impacted communities. We see this as the approach towards addressing these comprehensive problems that communities face, and we see a lot of room for innovation, entrepreneurship, and addressing these comprehensive issues that we face in a new way. I was pleased to see the number of entrepreneurs that are in the room, because these are fresh new challenges that create new opportunities for folks to come up with new technologies, new approaches to ensuring that we all contribute to our fight against climate change.
Perfect. Now, so in many ways, the work that you're doing is unlocking capital. Denise, the work that you do puts it to work in community through the training programs, through the implementation programs. So perfect. Why does anyone here need to be part of the work that you all are doing? You've got it covered. You're unlocking the dollars, you're putting them to use in community. What's missing?
Is that this is all brand new, and that is not just going to be us. It's going to be us, right? What we're trying to create, and I like it, it's a new economic paradigm. One that is not an extractive economy, but one that really addresses comprehensive issues. So for us, the next phase forward, this is the third year of investments that California is making into these types of technologies in disadvantaged communities. It's brand new. The requirements that the investments carry with them are not just about reducing greenhouse gases, but they're also about creating local workforce opportunities, incentivizing contracting with minority and women-owned businesses. All of these different requirements are things that agencies by themselves working in siloed environments are not used to dealing. So it's going to require kind of a comprehensive approach to dealing with these problems in order to get the outcomes that we actually want to see. So one of the things that we are struggling with a lot in California is accessibility to this type of technology in disadvantaged communities because of financing, lack of financing in these communities, because of lack of deferred maintenance on properties that need deferred maintenance in order to receive energy efficiency upgrades or solar, or lack of education and outreach about what these projects can do and how people can benefit. So that's not something that we're working on, but perhaps something that someone else in the audience is developing new ways to approach those problems.
And some of it is about filling those gaps in readiness to receive the dollars. Is some of it as well about a shifting frame of reference on how we measure success?
Yes, absolutely. Cost effectiveness. It's a word that gets thrown out a lot in terms of how should we invest our money to combat climate change? And it's really per dollar spent, how much greenhouse gas reduction are we achieving? We're challenging that and saying you cannot just measure cost effectiveness by the reduction in greenhouse gases. If we're going to build this new paradigm, we need to think about non-energy benefits that folks are receiving, like improved public health, like improved transit mobility, like economic opportunities. So the cost effectiveness ratio might not be as good when you just look at it from dollars spent for GHG's reduction, but if you look at it comprehensively, you're really thinking about what is cost effectiveness. But that's one thing that we, in implementation, are really needing to figure out.
Yeah, those are good points. And we've been struggling. This whole energy efficiency, clean energy space should have been accelerated and scaled by now, because we've been working on this for a long time. And so when we look at the landscape, right, what we see is that the pieces are there, they're just not being snapped together. There is capital out there. There are trillions of dollars worth of capital that have not landed significantly in this energy space. There is the technology. The technology is just off the chain. It's just growing and getting cheaper and better every time we turn around. In fact, if there's anything else, there's market confusion about which technology to use, right? VCS, HS versus beta. We're at that stage. All right, so there's financings, there's technologies, there's policy, and there are people ready to play. But at the end of the day, the capital is not coming in because, I mean, when we talk to the capital markets, they say, okay, give me $100 million worth of deals and, you know, I'll write the check. And anything less than $100 million is just not worth the transaction costs for me to get into the game. Well, you know, that means they're not in the game, clearly. And then when we're talking about $100 million deals, then we're not talking about economic inclusion and making sure that people who are, you know, lower income and marginal are going to be playing. You're playing to the big guys once again. So we've got to figure out how to change the rules of engagement and institutions, and whether it's public and private investors. What are your rules of engagement, and how do you make sure that you're addressing the disaggregating those rules and making them the distributive benefits of your resources broadly available? So I think that's like one of the major challenges that we have, in addition to providing the capital that the small operators need to be in this business, but both the communities, because when in a couple of places, we're in the Bronx particularly, trying to develop community-owned and community-controlled energy microgrids, and these are big deals. All right, these are, you know, we're talking 250 million to start, right? So how do you actually invest in these community enterprises, you know, community-owned enterprises, to bring energy in a way that there's distributed benefits in terms of not only just the energy, but also the revenues that come out. And in our view, it's like, who should own the sun and who should own the wind? You know, these should be, energy sources should be held in common. And then we got to find investment tools that really allow communities to own and control their own technologies and to make it affordable for them. So there's a lot of barriers that I think financing, is not that their financing doesn't exist, but it is not organized to address the equity issues and barriers that we face in our communities.
I'm wondering if you would share the LA example, and particularly from that lens of the economic benefit of a small and a medium-sized, a small business that had the opportunity to become very quickly a medium-sized business, and how the capital wasn't, the Legos weren't coming in together in that situation. So
we had, out of our Contractor Academy, we had several success stories, but one in particular, who was an electrician. He's a disadvantaged veteran African-American electrician, been in business a long time, but had never done any of these large projects. We had pre-qualified him to work on LA County's energy, to be in LA County's master agreement, so that he could bid on energy projects for LA County. And he was able to do the very first zero net energy project for LA County, the Julian Dixon Library. Did a couple of libraries, did it very successfully, and went out. And but these were small projects. These were together about $1 million solar projects. He bid the next round of projects. It was about $20 million. He successfully won the bid. And I think it's because he was a low bidder, and I don't think he estimated the job well. But nonetheless, he got the bid. But the financing through PPAs just did not work on behalf of this community. We looked to 3 financial institutions to be able to provide the financing which he needs to be able to do the working capital to get the $20 million on the street. And at the end of the day, they was not able to put the financing in place. A lot of it has to do with his own, with the financial institutions wanting to know their return on investment. And when you play in double-digit returns, when you're already low bidder, when your bonding rates are high, it's not penciling out for anyone. And part of our challenge with investors is that they don't look at energy savings as collateral, right? And so people don't quite understand how to underwrite energy investments. And so we've got to begin to change underwriting standards. So financial institutions and others that, they don't want, the way there isn't a securitized vehicle for them to actually make their investments to bank on energy savings. And so those are some of the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, capital money is not risky. Capital money wants security. And for us, a big impetus for encouraging the state to target investment in the most disadvantaged communities was in order to facilitate private capital to be able to come in after the fact and say, well, there's some security there because of what we're putting in, what the state is putting in. But we know that in order to scale up, it has to be really private capital that does it, and it cannot be the public sector continuing to invest the way that it does. Public sector is always going to have a role, but it's never going to be able to scale, what needs to be done in order to achieve the goals that we have. So I think for us, it's really important to put the private capital, the public capital in. That's why AB 1550, that's why 2722. But moving forward, we need to figure out what are the ways to make it a little bit, maybe encourage private capital to be a little bit more courageous in the way that they're investing, and to be looking at energy savings as
and that's absolutely right. And what we don't have is a financing technology. We have a solar technology, but we don't have a financing technology which makes it very clear whose money, what kind of money do we need, and who comes in, who's first, who's second, and who's takeout. And I'm old enough to have been in the affordable housing world before we had the low-income housing tax credit, right? And we used to do housing projects one-off, and we get 3 or 4 different funders for this project and some new funders for that project. And when the low-income housing tax credit came to play, the financing technology took over, and the industry grew. We had a housing industry. We knew where to get the pre-development money. We knew who's going to provide construction financing. We knew who would actually do the takeout, right? We need that in a way that's reliable, consistent, for everybody to know that there is a throughput model, that there is the beginning, a middle, and the end. This is your role. This is your return at each piece, at each segment of that financing, so that everybody plays and they know how to play together.
Right.
We are really missing the early pre-developed money to do the energy audits and to do the technical analysis that needs to be done for larger projects. What we've done with our Renew housing model is that we actually have some utility instruments. We use on-bill recovery. We have state housing finance money that creates the early low-cost, no collateral, no security financing. We have the private sector looking at this and says, oh, okay, well, the work gets done, and then I'll take the back end. So how do we build a financing technology that makes it clear about a role for the public sector, the private sector, being a part of this process?
And in terms of building the financing technology, we have to make sure that it's equitable and that it's just. Because in some of the innovations, some of the concerns are things like loan loss reserves, where you're creating a subprime practice where the loan loss reserve is going to make whole the finance, the private capital coming in, but the low-income person who gained access to a loan loss reserve account and defaulted on that, who's making them whole?
Yeah.
So, as we develop these types of financing technologies, let's keep an eye towards equity and justice, to not develop products that at the end end up making things a little bit worse.
Yeah.
So who's best positioned to start filling in some of those gaps? Where do we go for partnership to build pilots, to build models, to figure out how to get to the point, that tipping point that you were at in low-income housing?
Well, where there isn't any money are folks. So like I said, we've got all of the big pieces, but who is actually doing the implementation? The implementation work, there's a huge gap with folks that will pull the pieces together and put deals together. And what happened in affordable housing is that we invested in community-based nonprofit organizations. We trained them how to build commercial, community-owned commercial shopping centers and housing projects. And they got ultimately the training to do the money. That's what we need in our communities. And so we can fight. We're good at fighting. Our communities are getting the policies, and they're getting clear about what the problems are, but no one's putting the deals together. We find ourselves, Emerald Cities, as being almost a lone ranger in this space, packaging, basically what it is, packaging these energy projects on behalf of communities with equity standards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are really important intermediaries that already are working in this space, but I think their emphasis and their focus needs to be a little bit more on increasing and supplementing the technical capacity that is already existing in communities. Philanthropy, I think, has still a really big role to play in being able to really generate the type of technical capacity that's necessary to bring some of this money into these communities. So for example, again, with these policies in California, we have a tremendous opportunity, a lot of capital coming into these communities, but some of the less resourced, less technically savvy communities are going to have a hard time competing to gain access to this capital. So what we are doing is encouraging philanthropy, encouraging the state, and encouraging intermediaries like Emerald Cities, enterprise community partners, to invest in the technical capacity building of those communities that don't have the appropriate tools to be able to be competitive for this. So I think that, again, these players are there. They're already working. It's about how do we collaborate and how do we approach this topic in a unified way so that it's not just folks doing one-off things here and there.
Yeah, and that is so important. And it's sort of my real concern where all of a sudden equity is everyone's business, and equity should be everyone's business. But what we're seeing in the landscape is that you've got these, long-standing, well-resourced and endowed organizations, nonprofit sector, doing the work of communities, right? Doing equity work without the cultural competence, without the in-house or cultural competence or community relationships to do it authentically, to do it in a way that is fully inclusive. And so, while equity should be everybody's business, the investment in frontline communities, investment in communities that are there, that are feeling the problems, that really know the solutions and just need the technology and the resources to execute, is where we have to, I think, where we're missing the boat and where we've got to be more focused and dedicated to ensure that that people are not providing for us, but that we are actually building our own clean energy future.
If I could just share a really quick story. We work with a community group in Huron, California. How many of you have heard of Huron? Okay, good number of you. So Central Valley community, really small. This organization has developed a car share model to take low-income individuals, particularly elderly, to their doctor's appointments in a community that's really lacking in public transit, right? So this is just started off the ground. They identified the need, lack of transit. They identified a model, car sharing, and they're just kind of doing it on their own, right? Now we have a set of investment that it can provide for fleets, clean energy vehicle fleets. We said, this is the perfect model. You should just, provide them with some resources and have them get this started. They needed a business plan. They needed financing. They needed, money for overhead. It never went anywhere. Yeah. And we're still working with it on trying to get this pilot that they've already developed off the ground. Yeah. But there's some of these structural barriers that haven't allowed that model to progress. Yeah.
And can I tell a story too?
Sure, of course.
Do you want to join this conversation? No. That's a really, one of the things that, and I'm sort of flipping it back to the audience, and particularly folks that have access to capital and can make investments in communities, to look at home, look at yourselves and your rules and your structure and your institutions about how you're engaging on this equity question. Really quick story. That was a part of a group out of MIT that was a global group actually, looking at how to make major social transformation. And it was a two-year journey, and we learned this thing called Theory U. Has anyone heard of Theory U? All right, so it was high-level MIT stuff. So we brought this into the Emerald Cities Coalition, and we have these quarterly sessions where we bring our teams in from everywhere, and labor comes, and community and youth advocates come, and we put this Theory U thing out to folks, which is really, if you're going to have a major transformation, what you have to do is first deconstruct what you're already doing. You just have to break it down completely before you turn to the bottom of the curve to start thinking of new things things, new ways of doing business before you then start going up the U curve for innovation. So anyway, but it was all in this very sophisticated MIT packaging, and we took it to our community groups, and our labor partners, the building trade, said, oh look, do not come with any touchy-feely stuff, because we do not do touchy-feely, and at the end of the day, we have to make sure every hour I spend here is a job that I'm not creating for my people. So anyway, we presented this theory U to these, to this multi-stakeholder coalition. And one of the painters in the room, he says, oh, I get it. It's like, what does it say, AAA, or what is it, the Alcoholics Anonymous? It's like, oh, it's a,
Double A, Alcoholics Anonymous.
yeah, and so it's like, oh yeah, you got to break yourself down before you build yourself up. So they took this high-level concept and made it real for them. But we took them out into the community. We took the building trades guides to meet the Black Contractors Association. It was in Atlanta, Georgia. And the black contractor, head of the black contractor was, peacocking it, and he says, we're good, we don't need nobody, we're bad, we're doing all this and that. And so all of a sudden the painter jumps up and he says, well, I don't understand. I've been trying to talk to you guys. I've been trying to find a way to begin to work with you all. And then all of a sudden this new relationship took place between the building trades that recognized 100 years of discrimination and exclusion of people of color, and this black contractor came together to begin to figure out how to really, develop a working relationship. It was amazing, and as he said later when he debriefed with us, he says, I found the bottom of the U. There's the painter guy who really figured out how to make change. But he went back to his institution and found out that he could not make the change that he felt, the transformation he felt at a personal level, because the rules was very different. The rules were, we got to protect our members, we can't, include anybody until we get all of our people off the bench. And so at the end of the day, personal transformation is wonderful, but you've got to look at institutional rules and the institutional barriers. And if you're financing barriers, and if you need collateral, if you only need to invest at a certain level, what are the rules that you have that's preventing the real major transformations that we need?
And I think that's at the crust of comment, Alvaro, that you made at the beginning of our conversation, or it might have been you. This whole idea of deconstructing and reconstructing. We've had 3 examples here of it not penciling out. The whole idea that when this contractor moved from $2 million projects to stepping into the $20 million range, he didn't have the capacity in the balance sheet for how others were going to view his competence to come into the work. When the community went to take their very beautiful relationally based solution for getting seniors to doctor's appointments to the next level and green it has hit upon a whole different level of requirements. And the same thing with the painter. The rules got in the way of him rising up that U and being in creative mode with community, making things happen. How do we get out of our own way? It feels like there is something invisible and a bit systemic sitting there, blocking a bit of the natural creativity that is inherent in our communities.
You guys have an answer?
I was going to do the same thing. Happy to throw that out to the audience as well.
I have to go back to the rules. It's kind of our playground, right? And the rules dictate the way that we engage. So for us, implementation of these rules that we have led to the creation of is really important, right? We cannot today say the governor signed our bill and we're out and going to pursue the next big thing. We got to stay connected. We got to see through implementation. We got to make sure that the outcomes that we intended to achieve through the policies that we passed are being delivered. And I think what we've learned in the last 3 years of implementing a policy that we helped pass is that there's just a lot of these rules that need to change, not just from the policy perspective, but from the agency implementing those policies perspective, from the institutions that facilitate the development of that project or technology. There's just a lot of rules that govern everything that we're trying to do. And all of those have to change. And again, I started with saying, with equity, we win. All of those policies and rules have to lead with equity in order to address the types of problems that we're seeing in our communities.
And I was, Avni Jamdar is here in front, and she's our Emerald City's San Francisco director. And I think part of the solution is the work, the example of what she's been doing, which is, the Emerald City's model is you got to have a relationship with these other folk.
Mm-hmm.
You got to bring all the parties to the table to understand what rules are in the way, first of all, and how do we mediate and bring something better together. And I remember her first project, it was an affordable housing project, and their labor was at the table, community was at the table, the city of San Francisco was at the table, and it was a bloody table. I remember being in Atlanta and Avni saying, it's falling apart, and so there's this new, energy efficiency project, and there were labor standards and community standards, and they were miles apart in terms of what the expectations were and the outcomes that were required. They broke through, community and labor and government broke through with Avni mediating all of the parties, and they came up with a new agreement, community workforce agreement on this energy efficiency project. It wasn't what the community wanted, and it was more than the labor community wanted to give, but it is now the basis around which all of their other projects are moving forward and getting better. There are now new levels of trust. There's recognition that, there is performance and that the outcomes met and went beyond everybody's expectations, but it was that level of engagement that just looks like it was all going to fall apart. Isn't that right, Avni? But she's still alive. She's still hanging in here.
Let's take some questions from the audience. We have 2 roaming mics, I believe, and I ask that you wait till a mic gets to you, even though we may be in proximity to be able to hear you. For the sound system, they want to be able to have the mic'd voice.
Hi, thank you. This is a really important session. We in Oregon are thinking of doing something like what you've done with your Cap and Invest. I think we're aiming for 45% investment in low-income communities and communities of color. But I wonder if there's anything else you can advise us, because you've been so steeply involved in this, about what we should do. It's probably not everything that you wanted, so I just love your advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been collaborating with a lot of our partners in Oregon as well, learning from each other around how to navigate this world. The biggest advice that I think I have, it goes to this question around relationships. Implementing a policy like the one that was passed in California, and hopefully the one that will pass in Oregon, is going to require a broad network of folks really kind of dog watching how this is all getting done. And the only way that we've been able to learn what we've been able to, what are the improvements that need to be made, what are the guidelines that need to be changed, what are the programs that are not quite working out, is through our involvement in something called the SB 535 Coalition, a grouping of over 200 organizations in California that have tracked the way that original policy that devoted resources to disadvantaged communities in California is being implemented. Within the scheme of the climate investments, there are 12 different agencies that receive money to implement a type of program. We chose 5 priority program areas to focus our attention on in terms of catalytic investments: energy, renewable energy, affordable housing near transit projects, urban forestry and urban greening, and low carbon transportation. That allowed us to really kind of comprehend and understand the challenges that folks were having on the ground in terms of implementation. And I think without that, we wouldn't have been able to address some of the issues that came up in the policy, one of which was technical assistance or the lack thereof. So from an early start in Oregon, and this is what we've advised them the most on, is to encourage some of that resource to be devoted directly towards education, outreach, and marketing in disadvantaged communities about what these investments are supposed to do, and towards technical assistance for some of the, for anybody who really needs it, because those 2 components we see are, critical barriers to getting the most out of this money across California.
And that coalition work is really important in the context of another movement that's taking place, which is called community choice aggregation or community choice energy, which is already state laws in seven states around the country. California, of course, is again ahead of everybody. California is always ahead of everybody, but Ohio and New York and other places where local governments can actually become their own energy provider, which for the first time brings energy closer to communities, where there could be community ownership, at least community control about the kind of energy folks want, which is typically more clean energy, so they can get clean energy. And I think in San Francisco just passed its community choice program. Alameda County is finishing, but they've had principles and standards of equity involvement. But there's opportunities for investment because there's new technologies. I mean, this energy transformation that's taking place is unprecedented, right? In over 100 years, where we're moving into, and even the utility industry is understanding the decentralized energy economy and this new networked economy and new infrastructure, this decentralized, energy resilient infrastructure that's being built. The opportunities to build community infrastructure that has co-benefits and multiple benefits beyond energy is absolutely tremendous. But then how do we make sure that community is at the table, they understand what the opportunities are, what the challenges, the implications are, and are in a place to fully capitalize on all of the benefits that are going to be able to be realized from CCA and all these other energy changes that are taking place.
Other questions?
Hi. When you talk about community...
Tell us who you are.
Hi, Elise from a company called ThoughtWorks. We're a global software development firm. I'm really interested in this question of when you talk about community-owned, what do those ownership structures ideally look like? How do you bring a group of people? What does the entity look like that you're bringing together to come into ownership of that? And how do you guys sort of think about that in your work? Because it seems like from a structural perspective of sort of organizing the ecosystem, that is a really critical piece with a lot of complexities.
Yes, so, there's maybe, my understanding, less than 100 community-owned solar co-ops around the country. So there are very few of them. Most of them are organized as cooperatives. The ones that we've been looking at are really rooted already in organized communities, right? So in our Bronx community, for example, there's already a multi-stakeholder anchor partnership. So, there's Montefiore Hospital, there's the zoo, there's Hostess Community College, there's, these big energy generators as anchor institutions that will really make the technical feasibility of this work at the table with community groups to begin to figure out. The first thing we've done was just the technical analysis about what's our consumption and how we build a microgrid and where's the real estate and footprint for that. But then there's the whole legal level of it. The legal, how do you have a multi-stakeholder cooperative formation? And we're currently working with a couple of climate centers to do that that legal analysis. So I don't have an answer, but we are working on our very first one to figure out how to put a co-op model together. There are other forms of solar co-op that's not community controlled, but there is purchasing co-ops. So in DC, there's the DC Solar Cooperative where individual households are able to be a part of a purchasing co-op, so they get cheaper prices and they get of contractors who would come out and do the work, and so it makes for greater efficiencies for them, and they are actually become a political force in terms of looking at energy policies in the District of Columbia generally. So there's several other individual solar co-ops that are out there that are primarily purchasing co-ops.
Any other questions?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Sarah Dimitrov, and I'm a project developer in Arcata, California. And we build a lot of renewable energy projects, perform energy efficiency for small commercial, municipalities, public facilities, things like this. So we're working, public and private partnerships often. And I'm curious what you think about the energy performance contracting model as a mechanism for smaller scale. I know it's operating on a much larger scale in the construction industry, but on smaller scale projects as a mechanism for bringing resources to those communities. And our community is very small and is economically depressed, and it's an area that needs some additional attention.
Yeah, I think it's part of these innovations, right? And I need to know more about how it applies to kind of the smaller municipalities. But I think that, I would again encourage, I think that we're in an age of trying different things. And I think for us as Greenlining, our biggest perspective is not indebting people more, right? And allowing some of these investments to happen in a way that allow folks to adopt technology that's new and improve their quality of life. So if there's a way to explore something like energy performance as a model in order to underwrite the investment and then use the savings and really monetize that and say, this is how it's guaranteeing the payback of this capital investment, we want to see that. We want to see those opportunities explore. What we want to avoid is redlining communities because of saying you don't have the capital necessary, so you just don't get it, right? Or creating these kind of perverse incentives to have folks get into debt in order to gain access to this type of technology, and then creating a potential hazardous situation for them in subprime or predatory lending kind of practices. I'm excited about it. I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done from our perspective to understand the model better, but we're excited about the potential that it has.
From our experience, the value of energy performance contracting is that the client who wants the energy work done doesn't have to put out any money, and it allows a guarantee, it provides a guarantee for whoever invests in this work. And so it's really no sweat off of the building owner's back to have this work done. The problem with energy performance contracting is that it has a pretty tainted history. And if you go to most municipalities that have used energy performance contracting in the 90s, 80s, 90s, they have bad experiences where most of these were pretty large firms that have come in and basically ripped off. I mean, they were making 20, 30% premiums off of the work that they were doing, and they were getting hits in different parts of the stream, and they were selling their equipment. So they're selling their equipment, they're getting money off of the retrofit work. So there's a lot of places where you don't even need to bring that up because it doesn't get a good response. But there are community-based groups. I know Enterprise had tried to develop energy performance contracting model. For whatever reason, it didn't work out, it failed, and I can't give you explanations for that. But there are some advantages, but there are also a history of disadvantage. So anything that provides transparency, that is not exploitive, should work. I mean, it's a model that could work with those kinds of conditions.
Yeah, and that's where relationships really come into play, right? If you're an entity that's trusted, an entity that can describe this project with new innovations, with new technologies, and say it does pencil out, that'll go a long way towards addressing some of the historic barriers that may exist.
Let's take one more. No? All right. So let's close it out then. And what I would love for you both to share, for me, for the audience, is your best wish, what you need most to accelerate your work. And so the need that you would call for, and a call to action for our friends that have gathered here with us.
Do you want to go first?
Right. First of all, I think this is one of the most exciting areas of investment that you can think about. We are really looking, I mean, energy drives the entire economy. Every sector of the economy, it drives food, it drives water, it drives transportation. And if we begin to rethink and re-engineer the energy sector, it is going to be the catalyst for major economic transformation. And when we think about economic transitions that are taking place, we've had several of them before, and we've really botched most of those economic transitions from an equity standpoint. We've botched, when we went from agricultural to an industrial economy, you know, there were winners and losers. We went from an industrial economy to a suburban economy where, you know, communities of color and others couldn't participate in that economy because they're restrictive commonists. You know, there are winners and losers. When we went from the suburban economy to a digital economy, there was the digital divide. So we've continued to go through these major economic transitions, and we continually keep people on the margins of this new economy. When we really are thinking about investing in a new energy economy, a new clean energy future, we are mandated, we are required to learn from history. We're required to make sure that we're making this new economy not only sustainable, but totally just and fully inclusive. So having said that, there's so much yet to be done to build this new economy and to make sure that the low-income communities of color are key players in it. For our standpoint, I think that we'd like to see the deals done. We like to take the policies and implement at scale. And to be able to do that, we need to invest in community infrastructure and begin to look at not just large-scale, you know, solar farms, but, you know, how do you look at community solar and energy infrastructure? Secondly, how do you invest in community businesses to make sure that they're able to participate in the jobs and the income opportunities that are there? And then thirdly, how do you invest in organizations like ours and in other communities that are the intermediaries that are packaging these deals? We have not built that kind of infrastructure yet to make the implementation a reality.
Yeah, you know, I think what we need in order to really advance our work are partners. Partners that are willing to be courageous and that are willing to think about the business model in a very different way, right? It's not just about return on investment. It's not just about cost efficiency. It's not about how risky this is, right? I think what we need are willing partners that are willing to be courageous and step outside of the mold in order to learn from our past and create a clean energy economy that services all. So we really do feel like there's enough pieces out there that just need to be better connected. And I think my challenge to the folks that so graciously came and listened to us, my challenge to this group is to address the hard part and not go towards the low-hanging fruit, right? And what I mean by that is that clean energy technology is mostly catering to the early adopters, the folks who can afford it, the folks who are already there with you on the science, who are already there with you on the assumed risk. Let's try to figure out how to make this available to the ones that are going to require larger investments in time and money and in ingenuity. Because ultimately, we want everyone to adopt this technology. And early adopters, by their nature, are going to adopt, right? The ones that are going to have a hard time doing so are the ones that are least resourced and the ones that are really facing the biggest challenges in a changing environment. So that's my challenge to the group.
And I would add to that creating a just energy transition is a moral imperative for all of us. And we may not have every answer that we need to go about the work. We may be uncomfortable about stepping into it. But the imperative sits that we are committed to walking on the journey, that we pause and ask the right questions, that we reach out to people that have been doing the work for a long time, that we put ourselves in a position of openness and exploration and creativity to deconstruct and reconstruct in a way that takes and breaks and builds where it is of benefit to all. I want to thank you for joining us, for being part of the conversation. Deep gratitude to our panelists, Alvaro
Thank
Sanchez
you for
and
having
Denise
us. This important
Fairchild.
conversation.
Really fantastic. If you would like to continue the conversation, we are going to be in breakout room 6. You're all invited throughout the conference to stop by the Energy Lounge. That is our space, along with Energy Accelerator, New Energy Nexus, and Etho Capital, where we're just having tons of fantastic conversations about clean energy. Thank you again.
Well, I also want to thank Sherry and CalCEF and the work that they're doing and the investments that they're making, these high road investments, to be a model for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you.